Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So this one is Jack and the Giant Killer, and it's a 1916 version of Jack and the Beanstalk, but it was called Jack the Giant Killer. When good King Arthur reigned, there lived near the Land's End of England, in the county of Cornwall, a father who had only one son, called Jack. He was brisk and of a ready, lively wit, so that nobody or nothing could worst him. In these days the Mount of Cornwall was kept by a huge giant named Cormoran. He was 18 feet in height and about 3 yards round the waist, of a fierce and grim countenance, the terror of all the neighbouring towns and villages. He lived in a cave in the midst of the mount, and whenever he wanted food, he would wade over the mainland, where he would furnish himself with whatever came in his way. Everybody at his approach ran out of their houses, while he seized on their cattle, making nothing of carrying 6 oxen on his back at a time. And well, as for their sheep, and all of their hogs, he would simply tie them around his waist like a bunch of tallow dips. He had done this for many years, so that all Cornwall was in despair. One day Jack happened to be at the town hall when the magistrates were sitting in council about the giant. He asked, "What reward will be given to the man who kills Cormoran?" "The giant's treasure," they said. "That will be the reward," quoth Jack. "Then let me undertake it." So he got a horn, shovel and pickaxe, went over to the mount in the beginning of a dark winter's evening, when he fell to work, and before morning had dug a pit 22 feet deep, nearly as broad, covering it over with long sticks and straw. Then he strewed a little mould over it, so that it happened to appear like plain ground. Jack then placed himself on the opposite side of the pit, farthest from the giant's lodging, and, just at the break of day, he put the horn to his mouth and blew. Tantivy, tantivy. This noise roused the giant, who rushed from his cave crying, "You incorrigible villain! Are you come here to disturb my rest? You shall pay dearly for this. Satisfaction I will have, and this it shall be. I will take you whole and broil you for breakfast." He had no sooner uttered this than he tumbled into the pit and made the very foundations of the mount to shake. "Oh, giant," quoth Jack, "where are you now?" "Oh, faith, you are gotten now into Lob's Pound, where I will surely plague you for your threatening words. What do you think now of broiling me for your breakfast? Will no other diet serve you but poor Jack?" Then, having tantalised the giant for a while, he gave him a most weighty knock with his pickaxe on the very crown of his head, and killed him on the spot. Jack then filled up the pit with earth, and off he went to search the cave, which he found contained much treasures. When the magistrates heard of this, they made a declaration he should henceforth be termed Jack the Giant Killer. They presented him with a sword and a belt, on which were written these words, embroidered in letters of nothing but pure gold: "Here's the right, valiant, conny man. The giant is slain, Cormoran." The news of Jack's victory soon spread over all the west of England, so that another giant, named Blunderbore, hearing of it, vowed to be revenged on Jack, if ever he should light on him, This giant was the lord of an enchanted castle. This was situated in the midst of a very lonesome and dreary woods. Now, Jack, about 4 months afterwards, walking near this wood in his journey to Wales, being weary, seated himself near a pleasant fountain and fell fast asleep. While he was sleeping, the giant, coming there for water, discovered him and knew him to be the far-famed Jack the Giant Killer by the lines written on his belt. Without ado, he took Jack over his shoulders and carried him off to his castle. Now, as they passed through a thicket, the rustling of the boughs awakened Jack, who was strangely surprised to find himself in the clutches of a giant. His terror was only begun, for on entering the castle he saw the ground stewed with human bones, and the giant told him his own would be ere long among them. After this the giant locked poor Jack in an immense chamber, leaving him there while he went to fetch another giant, his brother, living in the same wood, who might share in the meal on Jack. After waiting some time, Jack, on going to the window, beheld afar off the 2 giants coming towards the castle. "Now," quoth Jack to himself, "my death or my deliverance is at hand." Now, there were strong cords in the corner of the room in which Jack was. 2 of these he took. He made a firm noose at the end, and, while the giants were unlocking the iron gate of the castle, he threw the ropes over each of their heads. Then he drew the other ends across a beam and pulled with all his might, so that he throttled them. Then, when he saw they were black in the face, he slid down one of the ropes, drawing his sword, slew them both. Then, taking the giant's keys and unlocking the room, he found 3 fair ladies tied by the hair of their heads, almost starved to death. "Sweet ladies," quoth Jack, "I have destroyed the monster and his brutish brother, and obtained your liberties." This said, he presented them with the keys, and so proceeded on his journey to Wales. Jack made the best of his way by travelling as fast as he could, but lost his road, and was benighted, and could not find no habitation until, coming into a narrow valley, he found a large house, and in order to get shelter, took courage to knock at the gate. But to his surprise, and it was his surprise, came forth a monstrous of a giant, and this giant had 2 heads. Yet it did not appear so fiery as the others, for he was a Welsh giant, and what he did was by private and secret malice, under the false show of friendship. Jack, having told his condition to the giant, was shown into a bedroom, where, in the dead of night, he heard his host in another apartment muttering these words: "Though here you lodge with me this night, you shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains outright." "Sayest thou so?" quoth Jack. "That is like one of your Welsh tricks. Yet I hope to be cunning enough for you to get away." Then getting out of bed, he laid a billet in the bed in his stead, and told himself in a corner of the room this is where he would hide. And he did. He hid in the corner of the room. At the dead time of night in came in the Welsh giant, who struck several heavy blows on the bed with the club, thinking he had broken every bone in Jack's skin. The next morning, Jack, laughing in his sleeve, gave his hearty thanks for a night's lodging. How have you survived in the night?" Huh, have you rested? Quoth the giant. Did you not feel anything? Anything at all, in the night? No, quoth Jack. Nothing, but a rat, maybe, which gave me 2 or 3 slaps, with its tail, I think. With that, greatly wondering, the giant led Jack to breakfast, bringing him a bowl containing 4 gallons of hasty pudding, being loath to let the giant think it was too much for him. Jack put a large leather bag under his loose coat in such a way he would convey to the giant that he'd be eating the lot. Then he quoth to the giant he would show him a trick. Jack took a knife and ripped open the bag. Out came all the hasty pudding, whereupon saying, "Odds splutters her nails do that trick herself." The monster took the knife, and, ripping open his own belly, fell down dead. Now it happened in these days that King Arthur's only son asked his father to give him a large sum of money, in order that he might go and seek his fortune in the Principality of Wales, where lived a beautiful lady, possessed with 7 evil spirits. So beautiful she was, but possessed still. The king did his best to persuade his son from it, but in vain. So at last he gave him his way, and the prince set out with 2 horses, one loaded with money, the other for himself to ride upon. Now after several days' travel he came to a market town in Wales, where he beheld a vast crowd of people gathered together. The prince asked the reason of it, and was told that they had arrested a corpse for several large sums of money, which the deceased owed when he died. The prince replied that it was a pity creditors should be so cruel, and said, "Go bury the dead, and let his creditors come to my lodging, and there their debt shall be paid." They came in such great numbers that before the night he had only 2 pence left for himself. Now, Jack the giant killer, coming that way, was so taken with the generosity of the prince that he desired to be his servant. This being agreed upon, the next morning they set forward to their journey together. When they were riding out of town, an old woman called after the prince, saying, "He has owed me 2 pence these 7 years. Pray pay me well as the rest." Putting his hand in his pocket, the prince gave the woman all he had left. So after that, their day's food, which cost what small store Jack had by him, they were without a penny between the pair of them, not 1 penny. When the sun got low, the king's son said, "Jack, since we have no money, where can we lodge this night?" Jack replied, "Master, will do well enough, for I have an uncle lives within 2 miles of this place, a huge and monstrous giant with 3 heads. He'll fight 500 men in armour, and make them to fly before him." "Alas," quoth the prince, "what shall we do there? He'll certainly chop us up at a mouthful. Nay, we are scarce enough to fill one of his hollow teeth." "It is no matter for that," quoth Jack. "I myself will go before and prepare the way for you. Therefore, stop here and wait till I return." Jack then rode away at full speed, and, coming to the gate of the castle, he knocked so loud that he made the neighbouring hills resound. The giant roared out of this castle like thunder. "Who's there?" Jack answered. "None but your poor cousin Jack," quoth he. "What news with my poor cousin Jack?" And he replied, "Dear uncle, heavy news, God wot." "Prithee," quoth the giant, "what heavy news can come to me? I'm a giant with 3 heads. 3 heads! And besides, thou knowest, I can fight 500 men in armour, and make them fly like chaff before the wind." "Oh, but," quoth Jack, "here's the king's son a-coming with 1,000 men in armour to kill you and destroy all that you have." "Oh, cousin Jack," said the giant, "this is heavy news indeed. I will immediately run and hide myself, and thou shalt lock, bolt, and bar me in, and keep the keys until the prince is gone." Having secured the giant, Jack fetched his master. When they realised they were free, they made themselves heartily merry, while the poor giant lay trembling in a vault under the ground, unbeknowing to the party the two were having in his very chambers. Early in the morning, Jack furnished his master with a fresh supply of gold and silver, and then sent him 3 miles forward on his journey, at which time the prince was pretty well out of the smell of the giant. Jack then returned and let the giant out of the vault, who asked what he should give him for keeping the castle from destruction. "Why," quoth Jack, "I want nothing but the old coat and cap, together with the old rusty sword and slippers which are at your bedstead." Quoth Jack, "You know not what you ask," said the giant. "They are the most precious things I have. The coat will keep you invisible. The cap will tell you all you want to know. The sword cuts asunder whatever you strike, and the shoes are of extraordinary swiftness. But you have been very serviceable to me. Therefore, take them with all my heart." Jack thanked his uncle, and then went off with them. He soon overtook the master, and they quickly arrived at the house of the lady the prince sought, who, finding the prince to be a suitor, prepared a splendid banquet for him. After the repast was concluded, she told him she had a task for him. She wiped his mouth with her handkerchief, saying, "You must show me that handkerchief tomorrow morning, or else you lose your head." With that, she put it in her bosom. The prince went to bed in great sorrow, but Jack's cap of knowledge informed him how it was to be obtained. In the middle of the night, she called upon her familiar spirit to carry her to Lucifer, but Jack put on his coat of darkness and shoes of swiftness, and was there as soon as she was. When she entered the place of the demon, she gave the handkerchief to him, and he laid it upon a shelf, whence Jack took it, and he brought it to his master, who showed it to the lady the next day, and so saved his life. On that day, she gave the prince a kiss, and told him he must show her the lips tomorrow morning that she kissed that night, or lose his head. "Ah," he replied, "if you kiss none but mine, I will." "That is neither here nor there," she said. "If you do not, death's your portion." At midnight, she went as before, and was angry with the demon for letting the handkerchief go. "But now," quoth she, "I will be too hard for the king's son, for I will kiss thee, and he is to show me thy lips, and not my lips at all." That's what she said. And Jack, when she was not standing by, cut off Lucifer's head, and brought it under his invisible coat right to his master, who the next morning pulled it out by the horns before the lady. This broke the enchantment, and the evil spirit left her, and she appeared in all her beauty. They were married the next morning, and soon after went to the court of King Arther, where Jack, for his many great exploits, was made one of the knights of the Round Table. The Round Table, indeed, how precious is that! You would think, Jack being a knight of the Round Table, of course, meant he was rather happy and content. No, Jack soon went searching for giants yet again, but he had not ridden far when he saw a cave, near the entrance of which he beheld a giant sitting upon a block of timber, with a knotted iron club by his side. His goggle eyes were like flames of fire, his countenance grim and ugly, and his cheeks like a couple of large flitches of bacon, while the bristles of his beard resembled rods of iron wire, and the locks that hung down upon his brawny shoulders were like curled snakes or hissing adders. Jack alighted from his horse, and, putting on the coat of darkness, went up close to the giant, and said softly, "Oh, are you there? It will not be long before I take you fast by the beard." The giant, all this while, could not see him, an account of invisible coat, of course, which kept him hidden. So Jack, coming up close to the monster, struck a blow with his sword at his head, but, missing his aim, he accidentally cut off the giant's nose instead. At this the giant roared like claps of thunder and began to lay about him with his iron club, like one stark mad. But Jack, running behind, dove his sword up to the hilt in the giant's back, so that he fell down dead. This done, Jack cut off the giant's head, and sent it, with his brothers also, to King Arther, by a waggoner he hired for that purpose. Jack now resolved to enter the giant's cave in search of his treasures, and, passing along through a great many windings and turnings, he came at length to a large room paved with freestone, at the upper end of which was a boiling cauldron, and on the right hand a large table, at which the giant used to dine. Then he came to a window, barred with iron, through which he looked, beheld a vast number of miserable captives, who, seeing him, cried out, "Alas, young man, art thou come to be one amongst us in this miserable den?" "Ay," quoth Jack, "but pray tell me, what is the meaning of your captivity?" "We are kept here," said one, "till such time as the giants have a wish to feast, and then the fattest among us is slaughtered, and many are the times they have dined upon murdered men." "Say you so?" quoth Jack, and straightway unlocked the gate, letting them free. They all rejoiced. They were ecstatic. They were up and down and rejoicing like condemned men at the sight of a pardon. Then, searching the giant's coffers, he shared the gold and silver equally amongst each of them, and took them to a neighbouring castle, where they all feasted and made merry over their deliverance. But in the midst of all this, Mirth, a messenger, brought news that one Thunderall, a giant with 2 heads, having heard of the deaths of the kinsmen, had come from the northern dales to be revenged on Jack, and was within a mile of the castle, the country people flying before him like chaff as he walked to meet Jack. But Jack was not a bit daunted, and said, "Let him come. I have a tool to pick his teeth, and you, ladies and gentlemen, walk out into the garden, and you'll witness this giant's Thunderall's death and his destruction." The castle was situated in the midst of a small island, surrounded by a moat 30 feet deep, 20 feet wide, over which lay a drawbridge. So Jack employed men to cut through the bridge, so both sides nearly were at the middle. And then, dressing himself in his invisible coat, he searched against the giant with his sword of sharpness. Although the giant could not see Jack, he smelt his approach, and cried out these words: "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive, or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Sayest thou so?" said Jack. "Then thou art a monstrous miller indeed." The Jack cried out again: "Art thou villain who killed my kinsman? Then I will tear thee with my teeth, suck thy blood, and grind thy bones to powder." "You'll have to catch me first," quoth Jack, throwing off his invisible coat so that the giant could see him, and, putting on his shoes of swiftness, he ran from the giant, who followed him like a walking castle, so that the very foundations of the earth seemed to shake at every step. Jack led him a long distance, in order the gentlemen and ladies might see, and at last, and the matter, as they ran lightly over the drawbridge, Jack was light as he ran, the giant, in full speed, pursuing him with a club. Then, coming to the middle of the bridge, the giant's great weight broke it down, and he tumbled headlong into the water, where he rolled and wallowed like an enormous whale. Jack, standing by the moat, he laughed and giggled as he saw the giant, who was plunging and placing all about in the moat, yet could not get out to be revenged. Jack at length got a cart rope and cast it over the two heads of the giant, and drew him ashore by a team of horses, then cut off both his heads with his sword of sharpness, and sent them to King Arther. After some time spent in mirth and pastime, Jack, taking leave of the knights and ladies, set out for a new adventure. Though many woods he passed, and came at length to the foot of a high mountain. Here, late at night, he found a lonesome house, and knocked at the door, which was opened by an aged man with a head as white as snow. "Father," said Jack, "can you lodge me, a benighted traveller that has lost his way?" "Yes," said the old man, "you're right welcome to my poor cottage." Whereupon Jack entered, and down they sat together. The old man began to speak as follows: "Son, I see your belt. You are a great conqueror of giants, and behold, my son, on the top of this mountain is an enchanted castle. This is kept by a giant named Galligantus, and he, by the help of an old conjurer, betrays many knights and ladies into his castle, where, by magic, they are transformed into sundry shapes and forms. But above all, I grieve for the Duke's daughter, whom they fetched from her father's garden, carrying her through the air in a burning chariot drawn by fiery dragons. When they secured her within that castle, they transformed her into a white hind, and, though many knights have tried to break the enchantment over and over again, it does not happen. There is no deliverance for her yet, and not one could accomplish it, on account of two dreadful griffins, which are placed at the castle gate, and which destroy everyone who comes anywhere near. But you, my son, may pass by them undiscovered. You may be able to do this. Where the gates of the castle, you can go and not be seen, and you will find engraven in a large letters how the spell may be broken. Jack gave the old man his hand and promised in the morning he would venture his life to free the lady. In the morning Jack arose and put on his invisible cloak and magic cap and shoes and prepared himself for the fray. Now, when he had reached the top of the mountain, he soon discovered the two fiery griffins, but passed them without fear, because of his invisible coat. When he had got beyond them, he found upon the gates of the castle a golden trumpet hung by a silver chain, which under the lines were engraved. And the lines did say, "Shall this trumpet blow, spell soon the giant wherein, and break the black enchantment straight, to all shall be in a happy state." Jack had no sooner read this, but he blew the trumpet, at which the castle trembled in its vast foundations, and the giant and conjurer were in horrid confusion, biting their thumbs and tearing their hair, knowing their wicked reign was at an end. Then the giant, stooping, he took up his club. Jack at one blow cut off his head, whereupon the conjurer, mounting up into the air, was carried away in a whirlwind. Then the enchantment was broken, and all the lords and ladies who had been put there and in transformation into birds, beasts, they all returned to their proper shapes, and the castle vanished away in a cloud of smoke. And this being done, the head of Galligantus was likewise, in a usual manner, conveyed to the court of King Arther, where, the very next day, Jack followed with the knights and ladies who had been delivered, whereupon, as a reward for his good services, the king prevailed upon the duke to bestow his daughter in marriage to honest Jack. And they were married, and all of the kingdom was filled with joy at their wedding. Furthermore, the king bestowed on Jack a noble castle with a very beautiful estate, there to belonging, where he and his lady lived in great joy and happiness all the rest of their days. The end. So that is the British traditional Jack the Giant Killer, which is now called Jack and the Beanstalk. I did it in 2 parts because it is a longer story. It's from 1916. I also want you to understand now, if you look back at other ones I have done, can you see how they break it up and turn it into different stories? But if we look at the traditional Cornwall version, which is the original, Jack the Giant Killer, who ended up working for King Arther, who we all know, that's a lot of stories in one. It's just that other places I've split them up and torn them apart to make them separate. But that is the traditional Jack the Giant Killer, now called Jack and the Beanstalk. There was never a beanstalk in it. That was added later. So yeah, I really love that story in its traditional form. Again, I apologise. The way things are worded are very different, so it's hard to get the context right sometimes. Thank you for listening. Please hit that like button because it does really help. And I shall see you next time with another fairy tale, but definitely from a different country. Many blessings.